So welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, September 2nd, 2024, and today I want to talk to you all about the state of the 2024 Senate elections. A lot of you guys have been asking me for a more routine update on my 2024 Senate predictions, and I think now we should just start off with September, doing them also every 2 weeks leading into November. There hasn't been much conversation around the 2024 Senate races, and I honestly think that's largely because the presidential race has been so dominating in this cycle, and in terms of control for this upcoming Congress, the chances of a Democratic and Republican trifecta are honestly quite slim in comparison to where they were back in 2020. In 2020, at least, the Democratic Party came into that election hoping for a trifecta, and so they got it. In 2016, Donald Trump also came in with a trifecta, meaning a GOP House and GOP Senate to match the GOP White House. But it is very obvious that this Senate map is not too good for the Democratic Party, to put it lightly. I think this is the Senate map that they honestly have been looking at with the least amount of excitement and the least amount of pickup opportunities, given where Democrats are even starting out with the bare minimum of 28 Senate seats, with 34 in theory toss-up races. Republicans start out with a much stronger 38 seats. They only need, if Donald Trump wins the election, 12 out of the 34 to win control of the Senate. If Donald Trump loses the election, you're talking 13 out of the 34. So not at all a heavy lift, considering that we have states like Wyoming, Utah, and North Dakota on this map here, which makes math even more complicated for Democrats and much better for Republicans. And so here we have it. I think today we're going to be just mainly focused on, whether or not Democrats are going to win certain states, whether or not Republicans are going to win certain states. And so as of right now, we're going to go ahead and just start by characterizing all of the states that we know to be safe Democrat and safe Republican, to really help put things into perspective about how this Senate map is very complicated and very difficult for Democrats to win, but also not in a position where, they're entirely out of reach in this cycle. So Democrats' baseline in terms of safe states that I would characterize so far, Minnesota, I would arguably even say Virginia would be safe blue at this point. I don't think we've seen many data points post-Biden dropout that are suggesting that Virginia is a competitive state on the Senate level. I do think there's a possibility that it ends up being narrower than 15 points. I've fluctuated it between safe Democrat, safe Republican recently, but right now I'd say Democrats are in a position where Virginia and Minnesota are going to be safe Democratic states. If you look back at my old election predictions, Minnesota also not necessarily has swung too much. It's been largely safe Democrat. The big reason for that is because Republicans really have not nominated the right guy whatsoever for the state of Minnesota. It's not a good choice for them no matter how you cut the cake. And so Minnesota right now with Amy Klobuchar, who's arguably very popular, in a really good position. I think Minnesota right now is going to be a pretty strong state for the Democratic Party. And so that brings Democrats to around 40 seats. I also would say Maine is going to be a safe Democratic state. I'm not really expecting too much to go to Republicans when it comes down to the states. The Democrats already have a substantial advantage, right? Maine, Minnesota, Virginia are these states where Democrats, in theory, might have a competitive race here in another cycle, but not this one. And so Democrats starting out with roughly 41 seats that I'd consider to be safe. Now let's move over to the Republican ones, because this is where it really gets good for them in terms of overall composition. So Utah, Wyoming, North Dakota, Nebraska special. That's a special election. That's what that little circle means. Missouri, Indiana, Tennessee, Mississippi, and West Virginia is a state that I would say are going to be safe Republican states. Now, we already have our first flip. If you guessed West Virginia, you would be correct. West Virginia is the first state that I've characterized from going blue to red in either direction. Republicans are going to win in the state of West Virginia. Joe Manchin, the incumbent Democrat, rather independent, who caucuses with the Democratic Party, decided that he's going to take a step down, leave the United States Senate at the end of this term. West Virginia, Jim Justice, the incumbent Republican governor, used to be a Democrat, but Republican governor, now is going to win in West Virginia, likely by 30, 40 points. In West Virginia, safe for the Republicans, or brings the Republican Party up to 48 across the country, Democrats at 41. So you really start to see the deficit here. Again, if Donald Trump is to be president, Democrats need to win every single remaining race except one in order to win Senate control. If Donald Trump loses the election, they need 9 out of the 11. So not at all good math for them whatsoever. Democrats are certainly at a disadvantage here, but based on some of the metrics that we've been seeing, I do feel comfortable in characterizing some of these races to be, lean, likely, more likely than not likely Democrat. My last election prediction, I had Maryland as a safe Democratic state. I'm from the state, actually from Prince George's County, which is where Angela Alsobrooks, the Democratic nominee for Senate, is from. For a while, it looked like, with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, that Democrats were going to really outpace when it came down to the down ballot race there. Democrats were worried under Biden, but they knew Alsobrooks had an advantage. Recently, we've seen a really strong, high-quality poll out of the state that shows Kamala Harris up 32 points, Angela Alsobrooks and Larry Hogan tied. I still believe she's on track for nearly a double-digit victory, if not a double-digit victory, but it's not going to be a 15, 20-point margin like we were expecting. For a while, it was much more competitive, then it became more Democrat, then the enthusiasm really boosted for Democrats, and Angela Alston-Brooks was leading by 10, 12 points in the polls. Now it's showing a tie. I honestly believe that she's again ahead by nearly double digits, if not double digits, but it is narrower than it was before. Deserves a little bit of recognition in terms of characterization. And of course, I love my home state, so we're going to talk about it a little bit. But so Maryland right now, likely Democrat. Beyond the state of Maryland, though, they have good company with states like New Mexico that are going to be likely blue as well. New Mexico is a state the Republicans have really tried to tap into, but haven't been able to win on the presidential level since 2004 and haven't won a Senate election in the state really recently. And so New Mexico is a state where Democrats are hoping they are able to really run out the margin here on the presidential. They more likely than not will on the Senate level as well. I'd honestly say it's a likely Democratic state. Republicans aren't even touching the state in terms of investments because they know New Mexico is a little bit too far gone. In terms of overall chances of victory, though, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are also states that I would say at this point are likely blue. We haven't seen much movement for Dave McCormick in a positive direction in quite some time. Same thing with Eric Hovde in the state of Wisconsin, but those races roughly, ran stagnant since the data points we've seen from months ago, showing the Democrats up 6, 7, 8 points. That's largely what we've been seeing. Pennsylvania's gotten a little bit better for Bob Casey, 10, 12 points. Still a Democratic victory, still all within the likely margin, but it is Arizona that has shifted quite tremendously in favor of the Democratic Party. In recent months, Ruben Gallego and Kari Lake were certainly in for a much more competitive race, but as the ads have started to drop, as the endorsements have started to reel in for Ruben Gallego, this state has become far less likely to vote for Kari Lake, which means Arizona at this point is in fact a likely Democratic state. So that brings us to 46 for the Democrats, 46 for the Republicans. Now here's where it gets tricky. Texas and Florida are two states that Republicans are likely going to do well in, but Florida more so than Texas. I think Florida right now deserves the characterization of likely Republican. I don't think Democrats are really in striking distance in the state. I do think that the polls suggest Florida is going to be more competitive than we otherwise thought. I think we are on track for expecting 10, 12-point victory for Rick Scott. It's probably going to be more tame, more like 6, 7 points, but still a victory regardless. And Rick Scott's the guy who won in 2018 by under half a point, under a quarter of a percentage point. So Florida was very competitive back in 2018. Rick Scott has gotten more popular. The state has gotten more Republican. Florida's likely still going to vote red on that Senate level. But if you notice one thing from my previous prediction, Texas used to be likely red. Today does not share that characterization. I think we're actually done here in terms of characterizing states as likely so far. I think really the rest of these states are going to be decided by margins of less than 5 points, which arguably means that this race is up for grabs in every single state. Texas, I think, less so than others. I think in terms of who I expect to win in the state, which you will find out in just a moment, I'm still very much of the opinion that Democrats, in theory and in future elections, can target a state like Texas. I don't know if this is the election cycle. And I know that probably is a very tired thing for Democrats to hear. Texas might flip in the future, but this is not the time. But I mean it genuinely. Texas is a state that will require hundreds of millions of dollars of investment from the Democratic Party to crack that Republican lead just that exists. Democrats are starting to see slipping in the Rio Grande Valley and the southern border, and really areas of the state the Democrats relied on to bring Beto O'Rourke so close to victory in 2018, combined with the fact the Democrats are starting to see slippage in the rural areas. Democrats are making up for it and counteracting it, by a substantial amount in the suburban areas outside of Dallas, outside of Austin, right, outside of Houston, outside of these major population centers where the urban sprawl and the suburban region is moving in favor of the left, which makes Texas, especially in recent data points, more competitive. But it doesn't mean it's going to flip blue. So Texas right now, I would say, kicks off our states that we characterize as lean or tilt states, because I think this is really the characterization that I am most comfortable with right now. So Texas, Florida, that brings us down to 4 toss-up races: Michigan, Ohio, Montana, and Nevada. Now, I will say this. The data we have been getting out of Nevada makes me inclined to make it a likely blue state. And I honestly think this is a state that might be a very big sleeper for Republicans. Sam Brown is not a phenomenal candidate. I don't think that he was really this amazing, brilliant person that Republicans could have put forth in the election. I think he ran too far to the right in 2022. I think his electoral stances really have flip-flopped quite tremendously. He's very mixed when it comes down to his views on abortion. And just generally, I do believe that in the state of Nevada right now, Jackie Rosen is relatively popular. She unseated a Republican incumbent in 2018. She was a swing district Democrat. I mean, she has the electoral track record that proves that she knows how to win not only in her district, but also statewide against a Republican. And while Dean Heller was not necessarily the most popular guy in the state, he was actually largely seen as more bipartisan and more centrist, which is why he wasn't as popular amongst Republicans either. But even then, Dean Heller was not on track to win in 2018 until the final stretch when he led in the polls. And even then, Jackie Rosen not only outperformed the polls, but won by 5 points. And so Nevada, I would actually say, sort of convinces me at this point to shift it very, very close to being a likely state. I think if I see more data points in a month from now saying it's a 10, 12-point race, she'll probably win by 6, 7, 8, 9. So better than before, but right now I'd say I'm most comfortable, again, just keeping that lean blue characterization, really narrowing down the Senate to Michigan, Ohio, and Montana. Now, if you've noticed that the Republicans are already at 50, that means that at this point, if Donald Trump wins the election, Republicans win Senate control. And so that it really is a point that Democrats have to really reconcile is that, even if they put all of their efforts and all of their time into winning Montana, Michigan, Ohio, if Donald Trump wins the presidency, that's wraps, right? He wins with the 50-50 split. It would be J.D. Vance presiding over that, breaking the tie for Democrats there. And so Michigan, Ohio, Montana, these are 3 toss-up races the Democrats are really going to try to invest in. But they have to remember that a lot of it is contingent on how Kamala Harris does. Michigan is also one of those states that I would say is getting closer to becoming a likely Democratic state rather than lean. Elisa Slotkin is starting to take it away from Mike Rogers, I can imagine, in 2 weeks' time. If the data points are very similar, both Nevada and Michigan move over to being likely Democratic states. But right now, I think I'm going to play it the safest in saying that Democrats are in the advantage in Michigan and Nevada, but not by more than 5 points. I don't think I necessarily feel the most comfortable characterizing it as such. Now, here's where it gets difficult. Ohio and Montana are 2 states that Donald Trump is likely to do very well in. I think he's going to win Montana by 15 points plus. He's going to win Ohio by 8 points plus. These are states that really aren't budging. And with that in mind in Montana, I do think Tim Sheehy is on track for a victory in the state. Now, I think it's going to be close, but I think John Tester will lose by 3, 4, or 5 points. I don't think we're really in for this narrowed down half a digit, 1-point race with Donald Trump on the ballot in 2024. It's very different than when it was in 2012, and very different than where it was in 2018 when Donald Trump was not at the top of the ticket. And I get it. John Tester is popular, but I don't know that there are many incumbents out there that are popular enough to overcome this level of politicization, especially running alongside the same ballot. We've seen it happen. 2020 was the last time we saw a Republican win in a Biden state, and that was in the state of Maine. That was in the state of Maine running alongside, the last time we saw a Republican win in a state running alongside a national Democrat who won the state by a substantial amount. And that was because of a very unique circumstance. Susan Collins, who had a record-breaking approval, massive election victory 6 years prior, 35 points, narrowed down to 8. So a massive, massive reduction. I think John Tester will ultimately succumb to over-politicization and polarization. That means that Montana isn't as pro or as much of a split ticket state as it was historically. And so Montana, right now, Republicans would win Senate control through the state. The final state I will characterize right now is the state of Ohio. Now, this one I have really, really grappled with. Back and forth between a Republican state and a Democratic state, and I think it's quite interesting. I think it's going to take a lot for Sherrod Brown to win in the state of Ohio. It's going to take tremendous, tremendous work. I think as it stands, and I love you, and I know I say I think a lot, but that's because I'm not trying to sell or oversell you on anything in one direction or the other, because a lot of this is fluid, and a lot of this does change practically overnight in American politics. Right now, Ohio is a state that I would feel most comfortable saying is a lean Democratic state rather than tilt, because the data out of the state has not, in fact, narrowed up in a way that Bernie Moreno would have hoped for. He's now campaigning on being down 5 instead of 8, and granted, that's a good place to be. But we have yet to see consistent data points out of the state suggesting that Sherrod Brown is on a pathway to lose in Ohio. Polarization does take hold. In a state like Montana, where Trump is going to win by 15, 16 points, I think that's enough to say, you know what, Donald Trump brings the Democrats, Republicans rather, past the finish line. I don't know if I can make that argument for Ohio. Not yet. Until the numbers start to get much better for Trump in the state, I still think Sherrod Brown is a fighting chance and is the favorite to win the race. So here we are. 51 for the Republicans. They win back Senate control. 49 for the Democrats. A competitive Senate election. But the map just isn't conducive to a Democratic victory. Republicans win back Senate control in 2024. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server if you go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.